Rich, welcome to the show. We're going to do a tribute today. It's a tribute to a couple of guys who passed away that we worked with and enjoyed, and they were full of life. It was a father and a son. Both passed away separately, but in an untimely manners, and they were very involved with our Beckett Publications Company as well as the National. So they were known in the industry, but certainly well known to us and appreciated by us for their quirks, for their excellence, and their contributions. It's Jerry Hersh and Mike Hersh. So, Rich, welcome to the show.
And thanks for having me. And yes, Mike and I basically came to Beckett at the same time in 1990. He came a couple weeks after I did because I was originally supposed to be the hockey guy, and I was a little out of my depth doing hockey, but I could pick up football a lot faster. Mike was available, and we brought him down to do hockey, which was a godsend to me, not having to learn all the hockey players, in one fell swoop. And, we in 1990, I know it sounds like a foreign concept, but we didn't have the internet like we had today. We weren't able to watch a ton of hockey games here in Dallas, Texas. You had to have satellite TV. Even, the cable didn't have a lot of hockey stuff down here. So it was much harder than it would have been, in a lot of other parts in the country. Well, football was really easy to pick up. You have the Sunday games, you had the Monday games, you have the occasional Thursday night games.
I felt like in a pinch I could do football because I'd been a lifelong football fan and collector from even collected when I was a kid, football, not as much as baseball. But hockey, another story. Hockey had not, NHL hockey had not come to, or at least the Stars had not relocated to Dallas at that point. And I needed a hockey analyst, and you are extremely versatile, Rich, but it was ideal to get some guys that hockey was their first love.
Right.
And I found out about Mike from Jerry. I had known Jerry from the early days of the company. Not sure who connected me, but he was up in the Philadelphia area. The Cherry Hill?
Yeah, they were from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I always used to see them at the Willow Grove show. They and Steve Friedman and somebody I don't remember, they would have basically the way the room was set up at the George Washington Motor Lodge, which may have not been the worst place on earth, but real close to it.
It was the pits.
There's a story where I heard that you went into the hotel room one day for the first time, and your wife at the time saw this roach in the bathtub and says, "We are leaving right now. I'm not staying past here." And that was one of the nicer rooms in the hotel.
Do you mean a different room? No, I mean a different zip code.
Yes. And that was one of the nicer rooms, I'm sure, in the hotel.
Oh, okay.
And that was just a terrible hotel. But the convention center was actually a good place for a show at the time.
I suppose I knew Jerry from back in those days, but I didn't realize that he had a life with card collecting and mainly football cards, and was one of the experts of selling a lot of the vintage football cards by the card, by the set. But he was also a very talented commercial artist and had been, I think, to some degree self-taught. And I met him for the first time. We sat together and talked business. He was down here at the Trade Mart, where one of his side, I don't know if it was his side gig or his main gig, but he worked setting up displays because he just had a great eye, setting up displays for men's clothing in the Trade Mart down there.
That was his main gig. That's
his main gig?
That was his main gig. That's how he earned his money. He'd go to Vegas a few times a year and do that. He came down here. That was his gig. He was paid so much money for doing that was his primary source of income.
And this was probably in '84. It was very early. And I remember one time he brought his portfolio down, and he had these great a lot of it was charcoal at that time, or pencil. It was just black and white, but very interesting. They were artistic and they were excellent representations, but they had a little bit of like a card-like element to it. And this is before most of the sketch cards and those things were around. And so I asked him, would he, as we were evolving the Beckett baseball magazine and bringing in some more photos, people seemed to like the covers. And I think we put Jerry on the inside cover for quite a while because the nature of printing, you can do color, and if you do black and white on one side, so the black and white was on the inside cover with other stuff, and it just, we got a lot, and people would cut them out or frame them or get them autographed, and again, that was my first connection. Then of course I saw him a lot at the National, and I remember Mike and not Etta, Jerry and not Etta, his wife, Mike's mom. I'd see him at the National, but at some point they said, you need to hire our son, Michael. He is very into it and very intense, which was certainly true. And he was probably early 20s then?
He was early 20s. I think he was 22 when he came down here. He might have even been a little younger.
And he also he was very talented artistically as well.
Jerry always said he had more talent than. And I think Jerry was right, because Mike went to school a little bit for art. He had the same eye for design that his father had, but he also had even more talent on a lot of that stuff. He worked in the corporate world.
And he later applied it to the Ralph Lauren or Polo or he had some different gigs with the clothing designers, right. I think.
And when we lost Mike, he had just accepted a job at J.C. Penney, and he was going to be coming down here frequently.
Which would have been great. And
it was kind of sad because we saw him a couple weeks before he passed. And I wrote about this for my column at the time for Rich Muller's Sports Collectors Daily, where we were like a band of brothers just having dinner, going through the old memories. And
well, it was lunch or dinner or something, and I couldn't go, and I felt really bad about it. I didn't know that'd be my last opportunity to see him, but the guys would get together occasionally, and I came, I guess, when I was invited most of the time, but I couldn't make that one for some reason, and that would have been my last opportunity.
Right, and I basically dropped everything. I told my wife that day. I said, Dina, by the way, so and so's in town. I'm going to dinner. Okay, it was like, no, this, and I didn't realize at the time it would be my last opportunity to see him either. And Mike was really an interesting person. We used to joke when he was working at Beckett about the 99-cent menu at Wendy's, and maybe 2 or 3 years after he left the company, he says, I finally did it. And I was saying, what? He says, I finally went through and I ate everything on the 99-cent menu at Wendy's in one meal. That was Mike. He wanted to show that he could do it.
Had a pretty big macho streak.
He did.
He was the guy that, here we are in Dallas, Texas, which means it's hot in the summer, but it doesn't mean it's warm in the winter, and it can occasionally be cold. But he'd show up in a T-shirt, and drive up in his car, get out of the car from the parking lot, and just not briskly walk, but just saunter into the office at whatever time he was supposed to be there with no jacket, because he was a tough guy.
Well, when I was young like that, I could probably get by without wearing a jacket. Now I need a coat. Now I need a coat in the middle of winter. Thank you very much.
Double coat. But he was a very intense guy in a way that I thought brought energy to some of the other guys on the team. When we were filling the hockey, populating our hockey magazine, and really wanted to have a strong team, which we did. But we had 3 or 4 guys. Most of the other sports were handled mainly by one person, and the hockey was a little bit more by committee. And Mike was a force. He was a force. He had strong opinions, and he backed them up.
Well, the thing was, hockey was small enough at the time where even though it was by committee, he could be the lead voice because he knew more than the rest of us. He followed more, and until we got more hockey help with the cards and Al Muir, he was really the voice we had to listen to because he actually would pay more attention to the sport. We could know the general overall, okay, we better make sure we get the key stuff right, but he could say the second level stuff, which is just as important, he would get that.
Which was tougher in those days because you didn't, there weren't all these ways to get pricing information in such volume now. You really had to dig it out. And you had to get with sources that could be verifiable or at least trusted on some level. And he was a straight shooter in that regard. So we were really delighted to have him on our team. And then he left for I think okay reasons. We didn't think people were necessarily supposed to stay at our company forever. But when it was time for him to move on into a different career, he did so with our blessing, and then I'd see him at the Nationals and as well as his parents.
And he and Jerry and Etta were an integral part of the National coming up. Red Smith once wrote a book called To Absent Friends, which was a compendium, whatever, I can't pronounce that word, but it was a assortment of his columns he wrote. A compendium, thank you. Yeah. Compendium of columns he wrote as tributes to people who were no longer with us. And, and every year there's somebody at the National that's now an absent friend. And this year Jerry's going to be one of them. Yeah. And, for 20 plus years, you could count, since Etta was the head of the national and is the head of the National Dealers Group or whatever we call the board, is that they would have tables in the middle of the floor and you could visit with Etta, and I'd visit with Etta and with Jerry and with Mike, and we'd spend some time behind the table and we could talk about the old days, we could talk about the new days, and it was kind of fun.
Well, there was a genuine friendship there. I mean, I knew the family, they knew my family, they just took an interest, and again, just the fact that I had some history with Mike in a really positive way was it's always a delight to connect them, even if it's only once a year. It still was a great stop as you're at the national convention, which is pretty overwhelming.
I always felt good when I saw their table because I know, okay, I'm midway through the show, and I'm at a place where I can, if I have to stop and take a rest, or if I want to stop and they have a soda or some snacks for me, that'd be all well and good, And anybody who knows me knows that the only thing that may be more important than cards is food.
Well, I'm a foodie myself, Rich, but that'll be unusual this year, not to see Jerry, but I hope to warmly greet Etta in her, just as a friend, but also in her capacity. She's done a lot of service to the National.
No, they've done really good work. The National, they worked very well with John and with Burkus, and they do a really good job keeping the National working for the dealers. So there's a lot to be said for what they've done over the years.
Rich, you mentioned that after Mike's untimely passing, that was where we had the chance to see him at a dinner that I couldn't make. That was a big part of the impetus for me starting. We've got great sponsors for this show. Very pleased that a lot of the outstanding companies in our industry have chosen to be a sponsor, and I want to give them a plug as they've decided to try to reach this audience that would give them a chance to grow their businesses or strengthen their businesses, and they're already strong anyway. Beckett Media, Beckett Grading Services, Beckett Authentication, Burbank, my friend Rob Veras, ComC, my friend Tim Getch, Heritage Auctions, my friend Chris Ivy, Huggins & Scott Auctions, my friend Bill Huggins, Mike's Stadium Sports Cards, my friend Mike Fruitman, Panini, my friend Tracy Hackler, Tops, my friend Clay Laraski, and Upper Deck, my friend Grant Sandground. All of them quality companies and quality guys.